So, the neuron and the nervous system, the structure and the function thereof, these are the most important parts of our brain, and because it is what our brain is made out of. You have billions, if not trillions, of neurons inside your head, and spread throughout your body, communicating and making your body move and absorbing information and sending it to your brain to be processed at all times, basically from when your nervous system begins to form in the womb until the day you die. Your nervous system is constantly working to keep you alive. Okay, and so we need to talk about the different structures and how those structures function today. All right, so the nervous system is made up of tiny cells called neurons, and these neurons share a basic form. They all share the same thing. Now, different neurons do different things. It doesn't really matter, the special kind of neurons, but there are lots of different kinds of neurons out there. All of them basically have the following. First, out of one side, they have dendrites. Dendrites reach out to neurons. Have a cell body, which contains the nucleus, which has the genetic information to tell your body how to grow and what to look like. It also has an axon. The axon is a single strand that descends from the cell body, as you can see in the picture here. And that single strand reaches the end of the neuron at what we call the end bulb, or the axon bulb, or the axon terminal. Lots of different names for the same thing. So the dendrites reach out to neighboring neurons to communicate. They absorb the information. They send it to the cell body. The cell body either fires or doesn't fire. If it fires, it sends an electrical charge down the axon to the end bulbs. Sorry, thought I was about to die. To the end bulbs, which then release neurotransmitters that get sent to the neighboring neurons' dendrites, which then absorb them, and the process continues. Okay, so the axon is basically like an electrical wire coming out of the cell, because it is transmitting electricity, very, very, very small amounts of electricity. That electricity then gets taken to the end bulbs and is translated into a chemical release. And we'll talk about the chemicals in just a second. But the chemical release is what travels to the neighboring neuron, which then absorbs them, starts the firing of that neuron, sends the electrical impulse down that axon, etc., etc., etc. Oh, God dang it. Just let me sneeze. Ah. Stupid allergies. All right, so that is the basic makeup of a neuron. Now, one thing that you'll notice on the axon of this particular neuron is some cells called the myelin sheath. Okay, myelin is basically a fatty material which acts as an insulator for the axon. If for some reason you don't have myelin surrounding that axon, is basically acting like a live wire, and it can actually short circuit on other axons, and it can cause information to go in all kinds of different directions, and it's really, really not good. It can lead to neurological disorders that can cause you to not be able to move your limbs, or you won't be able to feel your hand, because it'll be basically not dead, but numb, okay? Because the information isn't getting to where it needs to go. So the myelin is very, very important to the process to make sure that the information is actually getting to where it needs to go. So, at any point along this path, if anything gets severed, then there's no communication continuing. So if the axon gets severed, which you'd have to be like a a laser scalpel to be able to do something like that. But if the axon is severed, then the neuron can't communicate anymore, and it's useless. All right. But that is the basics of the neuron. Okay. Your brain is made up of billions, if not trillions of them. Your nerves throughout your entire body are all neurons. So if I'm pushing on my fingertip here, it is sending an electrical impulse down my finger, down my arm, up my shoulder, up to my brain to where it gets processed. And then I can, jerk my hand away if it's like a hot stove or something. So if I put my finger on a hot stove, it's hot gets transferred all the way to there and then all the way back to my arm to go, wow, that hurts. Okay. It happens very, very quickly. Okay. So we don't sit there and put our hand in fire and go, ow, that hurts. It happens very, very quickly. All right. There are some neurotransmitters, and we don't have to know all of the chemical makeups of this kind of thing. We're just kind of going through it. I want you to be familiar with some of the names of these things because you'll kind of catch them here and there throughout the year as we talk about things. So I want you to kind of have an idea that this isn't just a made up word that I'm using. It's actually a thing. So these are some of the main neurotransmitters that our body is constantly communicating with. The first one is called acetylcholine. This causes the contraction of your skeletal muscle, as well as regulating your heart rate, and promotes arousal in your brain. And by arousal, I don't mean that in a sexual connotation. When we talk about arousal, I mean being alert and aware. Okay. So acetylcholine is what allows you to be able to move the muscles that control your skeleton and allow you to move. Okay. If you are low in acetylcholine, meaning your neurons just aren't providing enough, it makes it very, very difficult to move, and you'll move pretty slowly. You'll also have a low level of attention. Low levels of acetylcholine has been associated with Alzheimer's disease. So there might be a link between that and Alzheimer's. So we're working on that connection. But acetylcholine is vital to be able to move your limbs and move and walk and all that kind of good stuff. Glutamate is the next one. This stimulates learning and memory, as well as many sensory and motor functions. Glutamate is the most abundant excitatory neuron in the brain. And when I say excitatory, it causes your brain to kind of pick up pace, and it causes your neurons to fire. Because there's two different kinds of neurotransmitters. There's excitatory and inhibitory. Excitatory makes it fire. Inhibitory makes it not fire. So no matter what else it's getting the inhibitory neurotransmitters, and the cell won't fire. Okay, an overabundance of glutamate could lead to migraine headaches, and it's often been connected to the overuse of a chemical called monosodium glutamate, or MSG. MSG is a basic salt that you can add to food that makes it taste way better. It makes the food really, really tasty. There are naturally occurring MSG in foods that you probably have eaten throughout your life, but they extracted the chemical out and started adding it to everything back in the 1960s, especially when there was lots of prepared foods to make them taste better because they tasted like the box otherwise. And so when people were adding it in there, what they found was that more and more people were having a sensitivity to large amounts of MSG. Then in the 1970s, an article came out that basically said that too much MSG, as was found in lots of Chinese food restaurants, was bad for you and could cause you headaches. And so all of a sudden, everybody was like, oh yeah, I have a headache every time I go to a Chinese restaurant. It must be Chinese food syndrome, which is what they kind of referred to it in the study. Turns out that's just a bunch of crap. It's actually kind of also racist because they weren't, the MSG was in all different foods, not just in Chinese restaurants. And I remember when I was a kid, the label on restaurants and boxes of food and prepared foods and stuff like that said no MSG, no MSG. It's kind of like the doesn't contain gluten, big scary gluten. Gluten is just wheat protein. Okay, most people can handle it. There's a select few that have a sensitivity to it, but it's not bad for you. As a matter of fact, it's sustained human beings for the thousands of years now. We're fine. But everybody is freaking out about this thing that we don't quite understand. Just like back in the 1970s and 80s, we did the same thing to MSG. And no MSG in this. We don't have MSG.
There's a lot of shots of
the
golden gun itself, which looks
cool. Thank you. So it's kind of one of those things that you have to kind of understand is that in about 30 years, the big signs that say no gluten will kind of start fading away, but then there'll be some other chemical that somebody will be, oh, I'm so sensitive to this one chemical, I can't eat it. And it's going to be a thing for everybody all of a sudden. And just recognize that when it happens and understand that history has repeated itself again. We are the dumbest. Anyway, so that's glutamate. GABA, or gamma aminobutyric acid, inhibits the firing of neurons and is the most abundant inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. GABA is associated with calming effects. A lack of GABA can be connected to seizures, tremors, insomnia, anxiety, epilepsy, and Huntington's disease. So if you are low on the GABA, it can actually cause you to have epilepsy or seizures or not being able to sleep or anxiety. You're just kind of always on edge because your body just can't calm down. The neurons are constantly firing and there's nothing to get them to stop, which GABA does. That's what the inhibitory nature of GABA does. Dopamine is probably a neurotransmitter that you've probably heard of at some point in your life. This is primarily involved in the processing of smooth and coordinated motor functions and motor movements. So the ability for you to very, very smoothly wave your arm back and forth as opposed to moving it in jerky motions. Okay, that's the dopamine in your neurotransmitters. Parkinson's disease is associated with the death of dopamine-producing neurons. Dopamine release in the nucleus accumulates and is linked to addictive drugs, sex, and attention-grabbing experiences in general. So you may have heard of things giving you a hit of dopamine. You may have heard somebody talking about that at some point in your life. And when we talk about a hit of dopamine, it's that little bit of that good feeling that you get when you accomplish something. You get a hit of that dopamine. This is something that addictive things tend to give us in larger and larger numbers. Sometimes, for example, in the terms of nicotine is a chemical which is highly addictive. But sometimes the most addictive part of nicotine isn't the nicotine itself. It's the dopamine hit that your brain gets when you light up a cigarette. When you sit back and just kind of relax for a second. Okay? That hit of dopamine is what gives us the, I want this again, I want this again. Some people have made the assumption or the accusation that phones are giving us a dopamine hit, especially things like games. Games on our phones are specifically designed to give us that little extra hit of dopamine so that we can feel good and we'll keep playing. Okay? If you've ever played a game and it just doesn't feel good, you're like, this isn't a good game, I don't want to play this anymore. But you go to a game that's very similar and you play it and oh yeah, this worked. That's that dopamine hit that you're getting. Okay, some people are getting the dopamine from things like Facebook or Instagram. Okay, when they get a million likes on something. Ooh, that dopamine hit. It gets them to do it again and again and again. And the addictive nature of that dopamine hit means they're going to continue doing that. Just because video games themselves are not addictive doesn't mean that our brain doesn't crave the dopamine hit that you get for beating a level or getting a new follower or whatever it happens to be. Okay, because in reality, does it matter if you have 5,000 followers or 5 million followers? No, it doesn't matter. Well, I want to be an influencer. Okay, you can be an influencer without being a part of social media at all. Okay, there were influencers before social media. Okay, but the fact is that we keep going back to those things because of the neurotransmitter hit of dopamine that we get every single time, and it makes us feel good and it makes us come back for more. Okay. Norepinephrine is found in neurons in the autonomic nervous system, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. This one has to do with sympathetic arousal and activating your heart and blood rate or blood vessels, giving you the fight or flight ability. We'll talk about that as well. Serotonin plays a role in the regulation of our mood, controls our eating, sleep, arousal, again, not sexual arousal, but like how awake we are, and the regulation of pain, as well as control of your dreaming. So basically, when you start getting more and more serotonin, basically when it starts getting dark, your brain starts producing serotonin. As soon as the sun sets, your brain starts producing more and more and more of it to get you to fall asleep. Once you're asleep, it continues the production of serotonin to keep you asleep. And then when the sun comes back up again, it hits your eyelids and your brain goes, okay, it's time to shut off the serotonin. Okay, this can actually lead to some serious problems for people who live in parts of the world that don't see the sun. For example, Alaska in the winter. If you live above the Arctic Circle, the sun sets in November and doesn't come back until I think February. So there's just no sun, period. Okay. That messes with serotonin and can cause them to have a disorder that we call seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, because we're funny that way. Okay, it's a seasonal depression that people get in when the sun isn't out for long enough to give us, the break from serotonin that we need. We also have natural painkillers, which we call endorphins. These endorphins basically are chemicals to help us to not think about or not feel the pain that we have when we are doing something that we are hurting in. For example, you may have heard of a runner's high. Well, in the runner's high, you are experiencing the high of getting endorphins into your brain. Okay, your brain is being flooded by endorphins because your brain wants you to stop running because it hurts, and you hurt, and stop running, you idiot. But if you force yourself to keep going, the brain goes, okay, he's not going to stop. Give him the endorphins, make him feel better, because this is ridiculous. I don't want to keep going. And so your brain gets flooded with those endorphins, and suddenly running feels good. Okay, those people aren't crazy. I mean, they are, but the fact is that those endorphins is what actually is making them feel good. Okay, it's not running itself, it's the endorphins that they get because their brain is trying to tell them, stop running, you idiot. You hurt. This is bad. But your brain goes, no. Keep going. You want to keep going. And then it gives the endorphins. Okay, so those are some of the basic neurotransmitters that we'll be talking about throughout the year. From time to time, we'll bring up serotonin or dopamine or endorphins or acetylcholine or gamma aminobutyric acid, what have you. There's lots of different things that we'll be talking about. So how does a neuron work? Neurons work in a very, very specific way. A neuron in a natural state where it's not doing anything is what we call in a rest state. Okay, and neurons need rest. They need to recover. They need to get back the information or to rebuild up the neurotransmitters that they release. Because if they don't build them back up again, you'll run out. An example of this is people who use the drug ecstasy. I'm not sure which neurotransmitter it is, but basically when you take ecstasy, all of your neurons go, okay, here's all of my neurotransmitters, and it just kind of releases everything in a big dump all at once. And when that happens, it doesn't have enough to kind of recover, and it takes a very long time to get back to where it is. And so the good feeling that you get for that short amount of time because of the drug wears off, and then you feel terrible. There was I don't know if we'll end up watching it or not. If we do have the time, we might. But there's a video that we'll watch, or possibly, that basically is it kind of talks about what actually is happening to your brain when you're using this drug. And they talk about the rave weekends where you're at a dance party all weekend long, and then what they call suicide Monday, which you feel so terrible that people have contemplated suicide because they feel so bad on that Monday, because all of their neurotransmitters have basically been gone. They've been used up. So anyway, so at a rest, your neuron isn't doing anything, but it's ready to go just in case. Now, when the neuron gets stimulated, which means the dendrites are absorbing neurotransmitters into them, okay, it sends that information to the cell body. Now, inside the cell body is sodium, and there's more negative sodium in your cell body than there is positive, until it gets enough of an excitation from the neurotransmitters, and then very, very quickly your cell depolarizes, and it basically creates a little tiny electrical shock to get sent down the axon. So from the cell body to the axon, it goes down until it gets to the end bulb, where it reaches the end bulb and releases neurotransmitters into the synapse so it can be absorbed into the neighboring cell. And we'll show you that in just a second. Okay. Once it has done that, that cell needs to recover. Okay. It needs to build back up the sodium. Okay, which is why having salt in our food is so important. It's the only mineral we have to have in order to live, because if you don't get enough salt in your diet, you're gonna die, because your body is constantly using sodium to help regulate the actions of our neurons. Okay. But don't have too much. I mean, don't sit there and pour salt on everything. You don't need that much salt. You just need a little bit of salt, but having no salt is also bad for you. So anyway, once the neuron has fired, it needs to recover. Once it's recovered, it can go back into the rest state, and then it can be stimulated again. How long does it take to recover? Not very long, unless you're doing a lot of stuff, and then it does take kind of a long time to recover. It's not like muscle. It's not going to tear, but the more you use a set of neurons, the faster the recovery is, and the faster it can fire, and the faster things can go. So if you've ever seen somebody do like a speed run of a video game, those people have a set of neurons that basically walks them through the game as quickly as is humanly possible for their brain to process the information that they see in front of them. Okay. When I play video games, I'm going pretty slowly because I'm not very good at them. That's why I don't play online. Online is not going to happen, because I do not need to be killed by a 12-year-old who does nothing but play Fortnite from dawn until dusk, and then tell me what he's going to do to my mom. Anyway, those people who have practiced something over and over and over again, whether it be a video game or a sport or anything, they have a pathway that is basically very, very strongly connected from neuron to neuron to neuron that allows them to be able to go very, very quickly. They're basically thinking without actually having to stop and think. Okay, that's the goal that we have for basically everything that we do, is to be able to get through it without having to think. Because the faster we can do it, the better we're going to end up being at it, because it looks like we're just, doing stuff. When in fact, there's so much going on inside of our brain that it can't be measured. It just happens. It's pretty crazy. All right. So this is a close-up of the connection that is made between two neurons. We have a sending neuron and a receiving neuron. Now you'll notice in the zoomed in picture on the right that the two neurons don't actually touch. Okay, they're not up against one another. They're not touching. They are actually very, 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 very close to one another. I don't know exactly how big a synapse is, but we're measuring it in microns, which is millionths of a meter. Okay, we're very, very small distance. Okay, so a synapse is the gap from the sending neuron to the receiving neuron. And as the sending neuron gets the information, gets the electrical impulse down to the end bulb, at the end of the neuron, at the end of the sending neuron, the end bulb is filled with these little tiny bubbles of chemicals called vesicles. And these little bubbles of chemicals release from the sending neuron and are absorbed by the receiving neuron. Okay. So that neurotransmitter release is what travels across the synapse. Nothing else goes across the synapse except the neurotransmitters. Okay. And it's basically the second this releases it, this is absorbing it. Okay. And the receiving end is like a lock and a key. Okay, so this one sends out a certain chemical. It can only bind itself to a very similar, to an exact lock on the other neuron. So on the receiving neuron, it goes in because it fits. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't go in, and it doesn't get absorbed by the neighboring or the receiving neuron. And then whatever is left in the synapse after this neuron absorbs everything that it wants gets sucked back up by the sending neuron. So the sending neuron is sending neurotransmitters across. They're getting absorbed by the receiving neuron. Once that is complete, the receiving neuron shuts off and sends the information to the cell body to get sent to that axon. And the receiving or the sending neuron reuptakes the neurotransmitters in the from the original communication. Okay, one antidepressant out there called Prozac actually works on the reuptake system. It's called a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or an SSRI. That means that when this neuron sends serotonin into the synapse to go across, when this one is done absorbing, the sending neuron doesn't suck all the serotonin back up. It just kind of leaves it out there for this to continue to be absorbed. Okay. And I don't know the science behind it, but that's basically what it does, is it kind of allows for it to stay in there so it can continue to have the effect of additional serotonin in your system. Okay. So when we talk about things like that, that's what we're talking about. So there's a sending neuron, a receiving neuron, the neurotransmitters cross the synapse. Nothing else crosses the synapse. Okay, nothing, just neurotransmitters. Okay. All right. So our nervous system is all of the nerves throughout our body. And we have basically split our nervous system into bits and pieces, into parts. And there are two main parts of our nervous system. That is our central nervous system and our peripheral nervous system. Our central nervous system is made up of two parts, our brain and our spinal cord. So those are the two parts to our central nervous system. Okay, all of the neurons in our brain and on our spinal cord are part of the central nervous system. Everything outside of that is part of your peripheral nervous system. Now, your peripheral nervous system is made up of two parts. The somatic nervous system, which deals with all of your voluntary bodily movements. Okay, so if you're waving your hand back and forth, that's your somatic nervous system making your body move. And then you have your autonomic nervous system. This is all of the things that you don't have control over: heart rate, breathing, digestion, pupils dilating, things that you don't have to think about, they just do. Okay, I don't have to think heart rate, heart rate, heart rate, heart rate. I don't have to think to make my heart beat. Okay, it just beats. The autonomic nervous system takes care of that for me. Okay, so it's not automatic, it's autonomic. All right, your autonomic nervous system is split up into two parts: the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system. The sympathetic system, remember this is the autonomic, gets your heart rate up, gets you breathing more, stops the digestion, stops the digestive tract, dilates your pupils. Let's see what else. Releases glucose from your liver, inhibits your dietary or digestive function, begins the secretion of adrenaline into your bloodstream, and inhibits the secretion of tears. So if you're crying, scare yourself, because that'll stop you from crying. Basically, if you think about this, this is your fight or flight response. So many of you right now are in your home. I want you to imagine you're sitting in your room and suddenly the door very slowly opens and it's a bear. It's a gigantic grizzly bear, and you're going to die unless you can fight it off or you can run away. Okay, now are you going to be able to outrun that bear? Probably not, because you're probably not in a room with more than one exit. So you're going to have to form a U-shaped hole in the wall behind you. But that is what is happening to your body. Your body has to get prepared to run or to fight. Okay, and your sympathetic nervous system does that. It shuts down your digestion because your digestive system uses a lot of blood, and you don't have time for that right now. Okay, you need all the blood possible to get to your muscles so that you can move as fast as possible. Okay, which is why sometimes when people are very, very frightened, they might mess themselves or throw up. It's because basically their digestive tract is so frightened by the system that whatever it is that's frightening them, that their body is saying, everybody out of the pool. And so everything comes out. Okay. That is the sympathetic system taking control of the entire system of your body. Okay. Now, once you've gotten your heart rate up and you've run away from the bear, okay, once your brain kind of looks around and goes, okay, I'm safe, everybody's okay here, your parasympathetic nervous system comes in and calms you back down again. Your breathing rate comes back down, your heart rate stops beating so fast, your pupils constrict again to a normal place so that you don't have to, you don't have dilated pupils. Your breathing rate returns to normal. You go back to being able to cry. And your digestive system gets turned back on again, because now that I've wasted all of that energy getting away from that bear, who's hungry? Let's go and eat. Okay. So our sympathetic nervous system keys us up and gets us ready to go. And our parasympathetic nervous system gets us to calm back down again once we've gotten to that stage. So again, our nervous system has two parts: central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system has two parts: the brain and the spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is made up of two parts: the somatic and the autonomic. Somatic is voluntary, autonomic is involuntary. Autonomic nervous system is split into two parts: the sympathetic, which gets you keyed up, and the parasympathetic, which calms you back down. So that is the basics of the nervous system, as well as your neurons. kind of a brief rundown of this information. We will talk about things that have to do with this throughout the year. We might talk about a lack of serotonin or too much dopamine or something like that. So this is going to give you a good background so that you understand kind of the biology of how your body actually functions. Next week, we're going to be talking about the brain and the parts of the brain. And later this week, we're going to be watching, you're going to be watching a movie that is going to talk about people with a particular neurological disorder, which basically stops them from being able to function, and a medicine which is going to help them come back. Hello, Leodley. Okay. Am I talking to myself here? No. I was going to say, you mean you can't hear me? Am I on mute? I'm not on mute. There's something wrong with your computer, dude. I don't know. But it's been recorded, so you don't have to worry that much about it. You can kind of take a look at it later. So do we have any questions about anything to do with the neuron and the nervous system that I can help to either confuse more or clear up? Have I been talking to myself? Okay. So again, Wednesday, we have class again. I will post this to the classroom as soon as I get done with this. Good. I'm glad you find it interesting, because it really is. Wednesday, we will be back. We'll be talking more about the neuron and the nervous system. There'll be a new discussion section posted to Canvas. Make sure you're participating in that. Check your scores. And again, I'll be trying to get those put in later today, along with everything else from the first 3 weeks. If you need to take the test, you have until Friday to get that done. Please make sure that you get that done before Friday. Otherwise, it's a 0, and I don't want it to be a 0 because it's so easy. Just take the dang test. And then, yeah, let me know that you're coming so that I actually set everything up for you, because otherwise I won't, because why would I? All right. I will see you on Wednesday.